Good morning, seventh graders. Today we are going to be talking about the bacteria kingdom. So we want to find out if these guys are teeny meenies or good guys. They look pretty nasty, and I think sometimes bacteria get a bad rap, but they're a little bit of both. So let's take a look at our different kingdoms of living things. We've been studying the characteristics of living things, all of the qualities of life, and now we're going to jump into a journey where we look in great detail at the 5 different kingdoms of living things. So this should be a review, but definitely put it down in your notes so you have it available to you as a resource if you need to jump back and look at it. Our 5 kingdoms are the bacteria kingdom, also known as Monera, our protist kingdom or Protista, the fungus kingdom, or fungi, plant kingdom, plantae, and the animal kingdom, or animalia. If you look at the graphic on the right, you'll notice that the bacteria kingdom actually makes up more total species than all of my other kingdoms combined. So even though they're tiny little creatures, they are super common and very numerous on planet Earth. So they're definitely worth spending some time to look at. Kingdom Monera, or our bacteria kingdom, is sometimes made up of 2 different kingdoms. Sometimes scientists, when they're classifying bacteria, will actually split the bacteria kingdom into 2 different groups: eubacteria and archaebacteria. Eu is a prefix that means true. So eubacteria are the common bacteria that we're used to. That top right picture is a lactobacillus, a very common type of eubacteria. Archaebacteria, that prefix archae means ancient. So these are ancient bacteria, really old, simple. Scientists believe these were the first kinds of bacteria on planet Earth. They live in very strange environments and do some interesting things, and we'll take a look at that a little bit later. So eubacteria and archaebacteria both make up our bacteria kingdom. So, what is it that all bacteria have in common, no matter what group they're classified into? All bacteria are single celled. That means their entire body is just one cell big, and it's not a very complex cell. They are made of prokaryotic cells. We know from looking at different kinds of cells that prokaryotic cells are very simple. They have a cell membrane, a cell wall, they have some ribosomes floating around in there and some DNA, but not a lot else is happening inside these bacteria cells. They're very simple. Bacteria come in 3 main shapes: bacilli, which means rod shaped, cocci, which is spherical shaped, and spirilla, or spiral shaped. Take a moment and make sure you draw these in your notes so you have a good visual picture and label them as well. Bacteria shapes are for a purpose. Each shape helps the bacteria in a different way. So you can see those images on the bottom are actually real life scanning electron microscope images of the different shapes of bacteria. The first one all the way to the left is the bacillus, or rod-shaped bacterium, cocci in the middle there, and then spirilla on the far right-hand side. Just a different view of these same shapes of bacteria. One structure that makes living possible for bacteria is their flagellum. A flagella is a whip-like structure, so you can see on the right-hand side, some bacteria have one flagellum, some bacteria have many flagella. Either they're all bundled together or covering the entire surface of the bacterium, or maybe even one on each side, so they act sort of like oars to row through the fluid. These structures are all about movement. Bacteria often live in wet environments, whether it's in your intestine or in a pond, and they're going to need to swim to move, to get food, to use their energy, and to be able to do that, they need some sort of structure to help them swim, and a flagella is what they use for that purpose. Take a moment, draw a super quick bacterium, draw a flagella and label it so you have a nice visual in your notes. One of the features of all living things that we try and make sure that we remember is to figure out how it is that they go ahead and make more bacteria. That 6 characteristics of living things list that we had from the beginning of the year, made of one or more cells. We now know bacteria are prokaryotic. Obtain and use energy. We'll talk about how they do that in a little bit. We also did talk about fermentation, which is their energy equation back in Cells in Action. Grow and develop, sense and respond to change. And one of those things is reproduce. Binary fission is the method of reproduction for bacteria. So we take one single celled bacteria, it grows Jabba the Hutt big, doubles its DNA, and splits into 2 identical single celled bacteria. This happens in 4 steps, and we'll look at that on the next slide and draw and label those. Remember that our DNA looks like a crazy hairball. It's not protected by any nucleus of any sort. But when I stretch out that hairball, it is a circular loop. This is unique just to bacteria. And each bacterium is going to get its own exact copy of that parent cell's circular loop of DNA. So let's look at what that looks like on the next slide. In step 1, you can see my standard bacterium. The cell will begin to grow extra large. That loopy DNA that you can see in the middle, look at it now in step 2. That DNA copies and it begins to attach itself to the cell membrane. So in step 3, as that cell membrane grows and spreads apart, each copy of the DNA is spreading further and further apart. And eventually in part 4, the cell will split into 2 pieces. You have 2 original size bacteria cells that are an identical copy of their parent cell. This is not necessarily a bad thing. If we have a wonderful bacteria like lactobacillus that helps us digest our food, we get an exact copy of that lactobacillus, and it's great. The trouble is when we get something like streptococcus. It's the bacterium that causes strep throat. And when that starts doubling, it's going to make more little bacteria that are going to bring us strep throat. So we can take some antibiotics, and we'll talk more about those soon, to help us get rid of that bacteria. So binary fission is the way we make more bacteria. Sometimes it's great, and sometimes it's not so great. Bacteria have a really special adaptation. Bacteria generally like to be in warm places where there's some access to water or moisture. When it gets too dry or too cold, bacteria can't survive well. So instead of just dying, they have this great adaptation. They produce what's called an endospore. Endo means inside. So this is a thick-walled protective structure that forms inside a bacterial cell and protects its DNA to resist those harsh conditions so it doesn't dry out and it doesn't get too brittle from being too cold. When the conditions improve, the endospore breaks open and the bacteria become active again. So this is sort of how bacteria become dormant or inactive for a period of time and then revitalize themselves when the conditions are more suitable for life. So let's take a gander at some specific kinds of eubacteria. Eubacteria, again, mean true bacteria. These are the most common kinds of bacteria, make up most of our bacteria kingdom. There are more individual species of eubacteria than all of the other 5 kingdoms combined. If you remember back at that original 5 kingdoms graphic, you could see that pie chart. There are a ton of different kinds of bacteria. And that means scientists need to find a way to organize them, to classify them. And we choose to classify them by the way they get food. There are 3 kinds of eaters. If you remember back from our bare necessities notes, we talked about the different ways that living things get food. We're either going to be consumers and eat other living things, plants or animals, decomposers, where we feed on dead things, and recycle those nutrients back into the environment, or we can be producers and use the sun to make food. Producers are always green because they're going to have chlorophyll, which is one of the chemicals necessary for photosynthesis. Our first kind of eubacteria is a special group called the cyanobacteria. Cyanobacteria actually act like plants. They contain chlorophyll and do photosynthesis. So these guys are producers. They come in shades of red, green, and blue, just like the different colors of chlorophyll. And because water is necessary for photosynthesis, cyanobacteria are usually going to be found in water. They're really beautiful, and we'll look at some under the microscope a little bit later. Our other big group of bacteria, when we were looking at our whole kingdom and split it up into two parts, eubacteria and archaebacteria. These archaebacteria are ancient bacteria. They are actually chemically different from eubacteria. If you look at their cell membrane, they are missing a special chemical called peptidoglycan. There is no purpose for me to have you memorize that, but I want you to just understand that there is a structural difference between archaebacteria and eubacteria. It's not just that they're older, we found more fossils of these guys, so they're older, so we give them a different name. They are actually physically different in their structure. They have a more simplified structure. So if you look at that image on the right hand side, you can see our membrane, our cell membrane, with some different kinds of proteins embedded in it, those big green and blue blobs. That's not the peptidoglycan. The peptidoglycan is that yellow chain that goes in the middle between them. Archaebacteria are missing that yellow chain in their cell membrane. We take archaebacteria and we break it into three different groups: the heat lovers, the salt lovers, and the methane makers. And if you remember anything about methane, it is stinky stuff. These guys are really strange and live in weird environments, really harsh environments where little or nothing else can survive. They prefer little or no oxygen in their environment. And that's not a problem because they can do fermentation, where fermentation doesn't require oxygen to make energy. But it's definitely an unusual environment for planet Earth. So let's take a look a little closer at our three groups of archaebacteria. First, we have the heat lovers, also called the thermophiles. Thermo means heat, and philos or philia means lover. And so these are different kinds of bacteria that love hot conditions. They live in ocean vents, hot springs, water anywhere from 60 to 80 degrees Celsius. If you want to convert Celsius to Fahrenheit, multiply it by 1.8 and add 32. So you're looking at about 150 degrees Fahrenheit or so, give or take. So it's really, really hot. Water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. So you're just shy of boiling water. Not much can survive in those conditions, but archaebacteria thrive there. If you look down at the image on the bottom of your screen, you'll see that there's this sort of yellowish green color near that water, near that hot spring. And the yellowish green color is from the archaebacteria living there. We also have halophiles or halophiles. Halophiles are salt lovers. So halogen are parts of the periodic table, elements from our periodic table that make salt. Halo means salt. These guys live in super salty environments like the Dead Sea and the Great Salt Lakes, where fish can't survive, but these bacteria are abundant. It's so salty that very few living things can survive those conditions, but the halophile archaebacteria love it there. You can see images of the Great Salt Lakes and the Dead Sea in the pictures below, and their sort of greenish tinge is from those halophiles. And last but not least, our friendly methane makers, the methanogens. Methano is that methane root word, and gen, like Genesis, means creation or to make. So, methanogens are methane makers, and these bacteria give off methane gas. It's the reason why swamps are so stinky and why cow farts smell the way they do. It's because they live in the intestines of those cows and they produce stinky methane. They do a really important job of helping cows digest, and they're wonderful decomposers, but they make a really stinky environment. So, for all the bacteria that are here on planet Earth, what's so great about what they do? I know that bacteria cause disease. I know that they live in my intestines, but what else is it that bacteria do for us? Bacteria are excellent for our environment. They do a process called nitrogen fixation, which means they convert nitrogen in the air, N2, into a form of nitrogen, N3, that plants can actually use to help them grow and be healthy. They also recycle stuff. They are decomposers. So, bacteria are breaking down dead plants and animals into nutrients for other living things. Without bacteria doing that really important job, we would have a hard time on planet Earth having the diverse, healthy living things that we have now. Humans have also used bacteria in a really interesting way. We use bacteria to fight pollution. There's a process called bioremediation. Bio means living, to remediate means to make something better. So, bioremediation uses living things to improve the conditions of something. So, scientists use bacteria to change harmful chemicals, like pollutants in the water, into harmless chemicals. When there's a large oil spill, instead of trying to sift it all out with different kinds of fabrics and cloths and nets, we actually sprinkle bacteria on top of the oil spill, and they will break up that oil into something that's more soluble in water and more easily collected. So they're helping to clean up our environment. Bacteria are also good for you. They add flavor and interesting um, tangy flavors to our food, like yogurt, sour cream, and cheese. When they encounter milk sugar, they convert it into lactic acid, which is what makes things taste sort of tangy and sour. It also preserves our food. Bacteria also are used for medicine. Yes, some bacteria do make us sick, but other bacteria fight the bad bacteria and make you well. We call those good bacteria, those disease fighters, antibiotics. When you take an antibiotic pill, like you see in the bottom right hand corner, it's actually made up of good bacteria. They're fighting the bad bacteria in your body. Those antibiotics come from the same source, the bacteria source, as the disease that's making you sick, just a different kind of bacteria. We have also discovered that bacteria are very efficient at making insulin. Doctors give that insulin to people who have type 2 diabetes. People who are diabetic need to take insulin shots to help their bodies break down sugar properly. When our bodies get too much sugar in them, it causes major problems like heart disease, circulation issues, all sorts of troubles. Insulin is very expensive and very costly to make if you are harvesting it from humans or even pigs. But we found that bacteria do an awesome job at making insulin, and it makes it cheaper for diabetic patients and more readily available for people to access medicine to maintain healthy, quality lives. Scientists are also doing some genetic engineering with bacteria. We've made lots of different things like insecticides, things that kill bugs, cleaners, adhesives, different kinds of glues, things like that that we can make using bacteria. So, bacteria have a ton of good uses. The big hurdle is that bacteria can be very harmful. Any bacterium that causes a disease is called a pathogenic. Pathogen is something that is causing a disease. Pathogenic bacteria range anywhere from something simple like strep throat to something super, super serious that will kill you very quickly and very easily. Something like MRSA, which is medically resistant bacteria. We don't have an antibiotic that fights MRSA very well. And so those can be really tough critters to heal. Many bacterium can be healed with antibiotics. Anti meaning against, bio living things. So antibiotics are medicines that fight against living things. Bacteria that cause disease, those pathogenic bacteria, don't just attack humans. They can attack plants, animals, protists, fungi, and even other bacteria. If you look at the picture on the right hand side, you can see some dueling bacterium, some pink and yellow bacterium that are fighting. You have some good guys and some bad guys there. One is causing a disease and one is trying to cure the disease. So, all in all, at the end of the day, we still have our question, are bacteria good guys or bad guys? A little bit of both, but I think more often than not, even though diseases are very serious and we should take safety precautions, wash our hands, make sure we're using clean things, putting clean foods in our body, bacteria do a lot more good for us and for the world than I think often they get credit for. Make sure you guys are taking quality notes. Tuck those notes back into the rings of your binder so we are ready to use them as an excellent resource as we move forward and study more about bacteria.